Hi, it's me, Olivia. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe to my channel for interesting stories and visit my Patreon page for early access, link in the description. Thanks. I nodded my head and gazed at her happy face in the mirror staring over my shoulder. For the first time in my life, I was in love. I didn't want Mrs. Smith to stop hugging me, and I would have done anything to make her happy. She was much different than my mother, who I could never seem to please. Mrs. Smith accepted me for who I was and didn't expect me to be someone I wasn't. I knew she wouldn't yell at me for getting a B+ on a math test instead of an A+. She would have been happy just knowing I had tried my best. I also loved the way Mrs. Smith smelled and how she dressed. The clothes she wore, usually skirts or dresses, were always so much more pretty and stylish than other women her age. She was everything a man, in my case an 11-year-old, could want. How could I refuse her request? "So, do you want to go outside for a walk or stay inside and play?" she asked. Playing inside wasn't my first choice, but it wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. True, I couldn't go outside and play baseball like I wanted, but Lisa had a number of great toys I didn't have, and most of time she hogged them whenever we played together. Now I could have them all to myself without having to share. I guess playing in the house one afternoon wouldn't kill me. In fact, the more I thought about it, the better the idea sounded. I could play with some neat toys and still remain dressed. I guess I would rather stay inside, Mommy. Do you think it would be okay if I got out Lisa's race car set? Actually, I had something else in mind for you to play with, she said while taking my hand and leading me down the hallway. For some reason, I didn't like the way she had said that. Mrs. Smith led me back into the spare bedroom and opened up the closet door. From it, she pulled out a large baby doll with long, dark hair. It was wearing a diaper, rubber pants, and a fancy dress. Mrs. Smith also pulled out a box that contained extra dresses, diapers, and other accessories. It turned out that the doll was one of those types where you fed it and it would then wet itself. It hardly looked used. "Here, this should be fun to play with," Mrs. Smith said with excitement as she thrust the doll into my arms. "Now you can be a mommy just like me." While I had always liked the idea of dressing up and even acting like a little girl, I never held any interest in playing with dolls. In fact, I was embarrassed to even be holding it in front of her. "A doll?" I said in a shocked voice. "Can't I play with something else?" "I mean, you don't expect me to play with an old doll, do you?" "Why, Susan, this just isn't any kind of doll. This is the type of doll that all little girls dream of playing with." She stopped for a moment to give me a huge big smile and added, "Do you know what the best part is? She's all yours, no one else's." I took little comfort in the last statement. But I don't even know how to play with a doll. What am I supposed to do with it?" I asked in a confused tone, hoping this would get me off the hook. "Well, first you give her a name," she replied while gently patting me on the back. "Then you can feed and change her. Let's see. After that you can read her a book. I bet she'll like that. Then you can give her a bath and make sure she's all clean and dry. And finally, you can dress her in a nightie and rock her to sleep. Of course, you'll need to sing to her," she added with a small, sweet smile. "Me, sing to a doll?" I protested. "I can't do that, I just can't." "Sure you can," she replied lovingly. "Susan, you're going to find that this is a lot of fun if you give it a chance. I used to spend hours playing with my baby dolls, and they couldn't do half the things that this one does. You're a very lucky girl to have such a nice baby." I didn't feel that lucky, not one darn bit. I didn't want to hurt Mrs. Smith's feelings, but there was no way I intended to play with this doll. "I really don't think I can do this very well," I told her. "Maybe we should try something else." "Now, Susan," her voice becoming a tad stern that made me take notice, "remember our deal here? You agreed to be a good girl and do as I say if I dressed you up in the prettiest outfit Lisa owned. I've kept my part of the bargain so far, haven't I? Now it's your turn to listen to me." Then her voice became sweet and encouraging again. "Trust me, sugar, you're going to enjoy yourself. Just give it a try, you'll see. I know you'll make a great mommy." I didn't have much choice. Mrs. Smith grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the living room with the box of stuff in tow. "Come on, baby. You can play in the living room while I work on this quilt. And if you're a good girl, maybe I'll teach you how to sew later on." I took a place on the couch while Mrs. Smith sat in a rocker close by. After a few minutes of me just sitting there holding the doll under one arm, Mrs. Smith asked, "What did you decide to call your baby Susan?" I felt my cheeks turn red. It was embarrassing enough to be holding the doll, now I had to name it. "I don't know," I muttered, hoping she would take the hint and let me play with something else. But Mrs. Smith wasn't about to give up so fast. "Come on, Susanna, give this a try. It would make me very happy if you did. Remember our rules, be a good girl now." I thought about it and sighed. "Okay, how about Sally? Do you like that name, Mommy? Sally is a very pretty name for your baby, Susan. But hold her closer with both hands. She's not going to bite. And talk to her and let her know how much you love her." I was totally embarrassed, but realized there was no way out of this. Trying to make the best of the situation, I lifted the doll up to my chest and started talking to it softly as any little girl would. Next, I took out a bottle and began feeding my new, unwanted baby doll while silently cursing the person who had designed it. Mrs. Smith, on the other hand, just smiled contentedly from her rocker as she worked on her quilt. Time began to drag, as every minute seemed like an hour. How long would she make me do this? I wondered. Not the whole afternoon? I hoped. Perhaps once I did everything she had asked me to do, I could play with something else. After feeding the doll its bottle, I checked the diaper and sure enough, it was wet. Instead of changing it, I pulled out the toy bathtub and filled it with water. Mrs. Smith got me a washcloth and soap to use and allowed me to take off my gloves and put on her apron. It was hard work washing the doll on my knees while wearing this fancy Sunday school outfit. The ruffles from the petticoat didn't cooperate and dress wasn't made for kneeing. Somehow I managed to soap and rinse off the doll without getting my dress dirty or wet. After drying off the doll, I faced the next hurdle of putting a new diaper on her. The problem was I had never changed a diaper before and didn't know what to do. In fact, these were real store-bought-in Pampers that you would buy for newborn infants. I hated to ask, but Mommy, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? Sure I can, honey. Here, let me show you how it's done. Mrs. Smith laid the doll on the table and taught me what to do. Okay, you give it a try, she replied while handing the doll back to me. I followed her directions and managed to get the doll diapered and dressed in another outfit. Your baby looks tired, Susan, Mrs. Smith said. I think you need to give her a bottle and make her take a nap. Here, take my chair so you can rock and sing her to sleep. Mrs. Smith moved her stuff to another chair and gently forced me into the rocker. I gave up trying to keep my dress down from all the ruffles and worked on holding the doll up while feeding it a bottle. Slowly, I started to rock in the chair, hoping this would end soon. Come on, dear, Mrs. Smith encouraged. Sing to your baby. Let me hear your sweet voice, honey. I gritted my teeth and softly started to hum, then sing, "Rockabye Baby," to the doll. After my third repeat of the song, Mrs. Smith couldn't take it anymore. "Oh, Susan," she said, her voice filled with pleasure. "You're so adorable sitting there. I just have to get a picture of this." She grabbed her camera and took a few shots of me sitting there. I, on the other hand, kept squeezing the bottle and trying to get the doll to drink faster. The sooner the bottle was done, the sooner I could lay the doll down and be done with it. After what seemed like an eternity, the bottle was finally empty of its contents. I laid the doll on the couch and told Mrs. Smith that Sally was asleep. Of course I knew the diaper was wet, but I was hoping Mrs. Smith would forget so I wouldn't have to change her again. "Oh, you can't leave your baby sleeping on the couch like that, honey." An idea popped into her head. "Wait a minute, I'll be right back." I heard her go into the basement and move some stuff around. A moment later, she came back up the stairs dragging something behind her. I thought it had been thrown away, but it wasn't, she said with great joy. "It used to be mine, but I'm giving it to you. What do you think?" It was an old baby buggy that had seen better days. The handle was rusty, the wheels were loose, and entire thing was filthy. Mrs. Smith got out a wet towel and started to clean up the dirt. "It's old, but still in good shape, honey. At least this way you can take your baby with you without having to carry her around all the time." After a few minutes of cleaning, the buggy looked a lot better. Mrs. Smith tied a few ribbons to the outside of it and gave me an old baby blanket to lay the doll. I placed my new baby doll into the buggy and covered her with the blanket. Then Mrs. Smith had me push the baby buggy around the room while she watched with delight. Oh, Susan, you look so sweet doing that. If only we had time to go to the park, you could push your baby around on some of the paths they have there. My mind went back to the park. I imagined pushing the baby buggy down a path dressed like I was. Being dressed this way was bad enough, but pushing a baby buggy with my doll in it, the image caused me to shiver with fright. Can I change now? I asked politely. Mrs. Smith looked at the clock and said, No, honey, I need you to wear this outfit a little while longer. In fact, I think it's time we freshen up your makeup, dear. She got up and led me back to her bedroom again. This time, Mrs. Smith seemed to put more care into making sure my hair and makeup was just right. I didn't know the reason, but was about to find out. We went back into the living room where Mrs. Smith made me repeat some of the things she had taught me that morning. I was drilled on the proper way to walk, talk, and sit like a young lady. When this was done, Mrs. Smith got down on her knees and started fixing the bows and ribbons on my dress so everything was just right. Why all the fuss, I wondered. Was she planning to take more pictures? Little did I realize that for the next hour I was about to play the ultimate game of make-believe. It started when there was a knock on the door. I panicked, thinking maybe my mother had come back early. But as I tried to leave, Mrs. Smith grabbed and firmly held me in place. Stay right here, she told me softly. Everything's all right. I was expecting guests at this time. It's my surprise for you. I can't stay here. Look at me. I protested as my body began shaking with fear. Was I ready for this? There was another knock at the door. Susanna, I don't have time to argue about this. In an even more comforting voice, she said, Look, honey, you look perfect. No one will suspect a thing. Just do the things you learn and enjoy being a little girl. You'll love this experience, I promise. Now, take a deep breath and relax. Everything will be all right. Mrs. Smith let go of my arms and walked backwards towards the door while keeping her eyes on me. Just relax, you'll do fine. She pointed her finger at me to stay before turning to open the door. Are you Mrs. Smith? Someone asked. Yes, I'm Am. Hi. You must be from the committee. I'm glad you could make it. Please, come in and call me Linda. 3 ladies entered into the house. 2 were in their late 30s, and the other couldn't have been more than 20. Thank you, Linda. You have a lovely house, one of the older ladies said as she looked around the living room and spied me. Oh my, and who is this lovely princess? All 3 ladies looked over to where I was standing nervously. This is my 10-year-old daughter, Susanna, Mrs. Smith proudly announced. What a pretty dress, the first lady commented. She's adorable, Linda. I stood there, too afraid to move. We were working on her outfit for the Little Misses contest at the state fair next month. We're hoping to win this year. Well, I don't see how she can lose, the second older lady replied. She's as cute as a button. And that dress, oh, I just have to get a better look at it. Do you mind, Susanna? Before I had a chance to reply, all 3 ladies were touching my dress, straightening bows, and smoothing out my skirt with their hands. I remember wearing dresses like this when I was younger, the first older lady said. They used to make me feel so pretty. Do you like wearing dresses like this, Susanna? I shyly shook my head, but Mrs. Smith commanded, Speak up, dear, just like I taught you. Yes, ma'am, I replied. Thank goodness I hadn't hit puberty and could still make my voice sound softer than it was. And you're so polite too. Linda, you have raised a fine young lady here. Does she have any other surprises? Only one, I thought, but kept quiet. Mrs. Smith just looked at me and grinned. Nope, none that I know of. Well, I have a daughter who's 13 and I have to fight with her just to wear a skirt to church, the first lady continued. She won't even look at a dress when we go to the store. You're lucky, replied the second older lady. My daughter is 17 and refuses to even put on a skirt. In fact, she wore a pantsuit to her prom. Can you believe that? She has a closet full of some of the prettiest skirts and dresses that I made for her, but she refuses to wear them. Maybe I should give them to Susanna, she said with a smile. I hate to say this, she added, but last month my daughter got her hair cut real short. Because of the way she dresses, she looks like a boy now. And when I ask her to wear a dress, she refuses. Her reason is that her other friends dress this way and she doesn't want to break fashion. How about you, Mary? Any thoughts? Please subscribe for the next part and visit my Patreon page for early access. Thanks.